Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the Footy with Fletch podcast. In today's episode, I'm joined by former Geelong and Port Adelaide footballer Jason Davenport. He played 28 games and kicked 29 goals. And from 2017 until 2020, he was a development coach at the Carlton Football Club. Jason is now the head coach at the Oakleigh Chargers and Vic Metro Boys programs. Hello, Jason. Thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Fletch. Thanks for having me.
No worries. It'll be lovely to talk to you today. Early on in your childhood, you were a sprinter and you played basketball. What made you want to get into footy?
Yeah, the sprinter bit probably is it's been quite kind to me over the years. I was definitely into my athletics as such, but never had a whole lot of success other than some school meets and whatnot. But basketball was probably my passion as a junior athlete, and got to the stage as a 17-year-old where I represented country Victoria, but felt that was probably my ceiling. I wasn't really to the level of pursuing an NBL or a scholarship overseas, that sort of standard. So I sort of reached my peak as a player and was pretty aware of that, and all my friends at school played footy, so I thought, why not make the shift? So as a 17-year-old, I just jumped on the back of a few mates out at Allenbank Football Club initially in the Allenbank and District Footy League, and away things went.
Do you think it was sort of challenging for you as a 17-year-old to be able to sort of develop your skills at sort of a later age than probably some of the other footballers at your age?
Yeah, I think so, particularly probably the craft component of the contest. So obviously in basketball, spatial awareness, all those types of things are really beneficial to footy, but the ability to avoid contact in basketball versus absorb it is a little bit different, whereas footy, putting yourself in a position to win the contest through good body positioning and everything else, outside of essentially a rebound in basketball where you can utilise your balance point and be a bit more physical. That was probably the biggest adjustment for me. I think as an Australian, I grew up kicking the footy in Victoria, so that's just sort of part of what you do. But I think the initial challenge for me was no doubt the fundamental craft of the contest was the hardest transition.
Who do you think were some of the mentors and people that really helped you in your first couple of years playing footy to develop your craft?
It probably was more so myself, really. I think it got to the stage where I was, after a couple of years, there was a window of opportunity to sort of take it seriously. And I really had to invest in myself and sort of really crush down things into probably a 3 or 6 month period where if I was going to have any chance of making it, I had to really take ownership of my career. And that's what I chose to do. I really invested in myself. I think, my physical attributes in and around my conditioning component, ability to run extended period of time at a high meters per minute rate, I guess, and also my repeat speed was I had a good balance of those two attributes. But the footy component, I had to really, it's a balancing act because you don't want to risk injury, but I found ways to improve as much as I could in a short period of time. And that was predominantly driven by myself with the generosity of many people along the way.
In 2006, you were a top-up player at the Geelong VFL team. What do you remember from walking into Cardinia Park for the first time?
Yeah, I loved it, Fletch. I think that's probably where I felt I was amongst people with, I guess, similar competitive natures. I think I was always at local footy. I felt like I was always more prepared than majority of people I played against. And I say that with respect, but it was more so my personality that I'd always go above and beyond and set really high expectations on myself. I wanted to be, the fittest player in the team and or even the competition, and make sure that there was an opportunity. It might take 3 quarters to break an opponent or to find a way to influence a game. But if I'd done the work, I could have the confidence to do that. So I loved when I stepped into the environment, the VFL program down at Geelong, that I was with like-minded people, and an opportunity to really grow from a footy perspective was there and provided. And Lee Tudor was probably that initial sort of mentor without him even realising. But as the coach of the VFL program and the time that he invested into me as a raw, overage VFL top-up player, I'm really grateful for that.
And also in your first season as well, you won the Fothergill-Round Medal, which for those who don't know is obviously for the VFL's best young talent. How significant was that honour for you?
Yeah, I think it's even the Fothergill-Round-Mitchell Medal now, isn't it? I think showcases a number of players, surnames who have had gone on to have an influence at AFL level that started in the VFL. And, that was, for me, it was definitely not expected, and was a real, I guess, from an individual honour perspective, it was something that gave me almost tipped me over with regards to enough confidence or self-belief that, hey, maybe I could forge a career here. So it was relatively, if not very surprising when it occurred, but it's always nice in reflection when you get a bit older, those individual awards that you aren't aspiring for that come along the journey are nice to reflect on.
You mentioned a little bit earlier, a little bit about your preparation. Can you take me into a little bit of insight into what preparation as a footballer really does entail?
Yeah, well, I think the first one's probably curiosity. I think for me, that was what worked well for me. I think there's always a conditioning component. There's a strength component. There's a diet component. There's a well-being component. There's so many different layers, and it's working out. We're not all wired the same, and what is that balancing act like for each individual? Some players really flourish when they're footy full on 24/7, 365 days a year, and others really enjoy 2 days a week where they just completely disregard footy and step away from the game to make sure they carry a passion. So it was definitely finding the balance for me. And for me, it was around every opportunity there was to get better, to apply myself as, basically, to use the old adage, but basically just give 100% when there was that opportunity, and let's live with the results. And if you're good enough, so be it. But if you're not, at least you can suggest that you poured all, everything into it.
What do you think was some of the main challenges that you faced during your VFL career before you moved to Port Adelaide?
Yeah, well, I think the challenges, it's funny, I don't know if I faced what I would deem as many challenges. I think, the environment at the Cats, I was drafted as a rookie from the VFL program, spent 1 year on the rookie list at Geelong, and then was promoted to the senior list during the 07-08 period, which I think is well documented how successful the Cats were then. So the challenge was, I guess, finding ways to continue to improve and put your best foot forward. And I think the healthy culture that Geelong created, 15 years ago, it started with understanding that, internal competition is a good thing. And if everyone's pushing themselves to be the best version of themselves and the player that they could, essentially from a ceiling capacity, that, if you're in the senior team and you're performing at a high level, there's guys that are behind you ready to come in. But if you are wavering in form, then it's a healthy competition being created, that there is, quality of depth and players ready to come in and play a role for that team. And I really enjoyed that. I felt it was a great learning experience for me. Again, it all happened relatively fast as well. So I felt my performances at VFL level warranted AFL selection, but then the performances of AFL performance from the Cats team would suggest that changes weren't necessary or were required. So I was ready, and my opportunity didn't come with the Cats, but I also really understood, particularly that second year on the list, that the Cats are at the peak of their powers, and other clubs are watching or keeping a close eye on those players who aren't quite cracking into the team. And that was how I approached it as well, that, every other AFL club was watching how I carried myself, what type of characteristic traits I had, the positions I could play, the role I could play, and how I could potentially contribute to their program. And that's where, Mark Williams and Port Adelaide came along.
And you mentioned Mark Williams at Port Adelaide. What do you remember from meeting him for the first time?
Yeah, Mark is one of the great characters our game's ever had. His resume really speaks for itself from a football perspective, but I really remember my first few encounters with Mark. He was really comfortable being true and honest to himself. And, some would suggest he's quite quirky or different. I would suggest he's just a really quality and consistent character. And he's one that I probably didn't realise the influence he had on me until later in life, and particularly now as a coach. and some of the things I learnt from Mark and my time at Port Adelaide and observing him and how he leads and conducts himself. Again, you add it to the list of people that have had a real influence on your career, both as a player, but definitely now as a coach as well. And I'm so really, really thankful that Mark gave me the opportunity, a second chance at AFL level, and and also the opportunity to learn off him was something I've never taken for granted.
You went on to play 28 games at Port Adelaide and kick 29 goals. How did you sort of find your time at the Power, and what were some of the highlights?
Oh, the highlights were there. I mean, when you are playing elite level sport, I think you got to really enjoy the small wins along the way, and that definitely includes wins and opportunities to play at AFL level and to go into a game with guys that you worked really, really hard with and come away with a victory. You really enjoy that. It's probably that next 5 or 6 hours post game and just unwind a little bit and enjoy each other's company and then get back to work. So. I really enjoyed those elements of it. I think there was a lot of learnings for me too with, where I was at personally and professionally in the clash of that, and, the opportunity for me to probably mature and grow and probably a bit of, I guess for me, upon reflection too, I really lacked confidence and self-belief at different stages. And that's probably what in the end cost me to be able to perform at a consistent level and also maintain my spot with Port. And that never makes sense at the time when you hear things you don't want to hear. But again, the ability to reflect as we grow and mature, and to at least come away with learnings from that to implement now as a coach and as a leader of a program, I think is really important ones. And it's important that we stay and find the opportunity to be vulnerable in that space and carry those learnings forward.
You mentioned your time as a coach. What do you think you would define your coaching style as, and what are some of the key characteristics that you think you hold?
Yeah, I think the cliche at the moment is to definitely indicate that you're a relationship-based coach. But I'm really confident that my skill set is to make sure I'm creating an inclusive environment. I try and lead with empathy where I can, and I think attached to empathy is honesty as well. And whether it be in elite pathway programs or VFL programs, AFL programs, things like selection are a real part of what we do. And I think bad news is no doubt better than no news in those types of situations. And again, I combine all my learnings through the journey and try to do the best I can as a coach and provide a consistent philosophy and program for my players. But I've also got to make sure I continue and maintain the opportunity to grow and learn from, whether that be mistakes or just ways that things can be done differently. I think is really important. So you asked that question, Fletch, and right now it sits as a certain area or category, and but that's always subject to change as I'm always looking to improve.
Coaching is it's an art, you could say, and it's an area that's so important. What do you think are some of the biggest messages that you want to get across as a coach?
I think first and foremost, I want to make sure I'm creating an environment for these athletes where they can be the best version of themselves. And that's not just from a footballer perspective. I just want to make sure that they feel comfortable as young athletes that are still finding their way, that they're in a position to express themselves as players and be themselves. And as long as that's respectful to those around them and appreciative to those around them, we're dealing with a magnitude of personalities, and we're all, raised in different households and have different opinions and ideas on lots of different things. I think it's making sure that those opinions are being heard and also that those players are able to express themselves. But then it's about how do we best, put that group of players together, establish a game plan that complements them, and then roll that out in order for them to hopefully have as much success as they're individually seeking through us being able to achieve something great as a playing group.
You returned to AFL football as a development coach at Carlton in 2017. Was it sort of hard walking back into an AFL football club with so many years out of the game?
Yeah, it's a great question, Fletch. I think it's one that I'm definitely really grateful to Brendan Bolton and the team at Carlton for bringing me in as a player that was out of the game for a period of time. I definitely honed in on my craft as a coach outside of the AFL level, coaching in the Geelong Football League and having my own program and, doing some courses around elite athlete mentoring and some other things. I was definitely investing in myself and trying to forge a career as a young coach. But at the end of the day, Bolts had the courage to bring me in to their program as a young coach with little to no experience at AFL level. And I'm definitely forever grateful for that and getting my journey underway as a coach at that level. So it's tough. You come into an environment where, basically every player in the list probably was better than what I was at the peak of my powers. And that can be intimidating initially, but you're not there to compare yourself. You're there to be a resource for those players to continue to grow and improve. And I tried to approach it that way. I tried to be, really energetic and enthusiastic and invest time in those players and be available for those players. Because as I mentioned earlier, you've got to make sure that you're driving your own career. But I felt if I could be the resource so that those that were in a position or wanting to utilize me to their advantage, I was always there to support them with that. So it's a great journey, my time at Carlton, and obviously came to an abrupt finish with COVID, and that's okay. That's all part of life. And coming out the other side of COVID and lockdowns and finding my feet in this role with Oakleigh and Vic Metro, it's been a real silver lining for me professionally. And again, I found the ability to grow during those challenging times. Even through the fact of observing it through the lens that my problems were nowhere near as great as a lot of people during that time. And so to put a lot of perspective on things and attach that perspective to how I coach and what's important, and the fact that we are coaching a game, and as much as it's a business, it still is a game, and we want to make sure there's enjoyment because it can be taken away from us at any stage, as we saw. So as mentioned a few times, Fletch, just always eager to learn and reflect and try and improve as we continue to go forward.
You mentioned the abrupt end at Carlton due to COVID-19. Was that sort of difficult to transition to life outside of being a development coach during those couple of years?
Yeah, it goes back to the question prior to. I'd spent time away from the game. And so I feel like that transition was a lot easier because of that. I was able to establish a strong network outside of football. I had a great group of friends, supportive friends. I spent some time actually working for one who had a small cleaning company. And again, just the perspective component. We had our health, we had a roof over our head, and we had opportunities still in front of us. So I tried not to be distracted by it. COVID was pretty clear when it came to the AFL landscape that cuts were going to be significant to the football department. Being a coach out of contract, it was pretty evident that made the most sense that I was a coach that was moved on. To Carlton's credit, they were very supportive of me and my family in that process. And the clarity or the transparency in those conversations made that transition probably far easier than I ever predicted. I think I was waiting for it to be challenging or difficult, and that overwhelming feeling never arrived. And I think that's, again, a compliment to the Carlton Football Club and the way they handled that process. But also, as I said, I'm also really appreciative to my own community and network that embraced me and supported me and my family through that time. And as I said, it's when you're living it, it all happens so fast. But again, the opportunity to slow down and find things to be grateful for is really important.
You joined the Oakleigh Chargers at the end of 2020, and you've got a great role there. You're currently their head coach of the Oakleigh Chargers and the Vic Metro men's programs. What has that role been like for you?
Yeah, it's been great. It really has. Essentially at Oakleigh, I have my own program, so I'm responsible for some paid staff reporting to me, including assistant coaches. I work closely with the girls' head coach. I work closely with our talent lead, our administrator. We've also, essentially I'm responsible for planning training, list reductions, talent ID, so many different things. And then there's the game day aspect as well. So it's been a great role for me professionally to grow and to learn. And, to be put in a position where I'm probably been a bit uncomfortable at different stages, I think is really important for my own development not at any stage have I felt overwhelmed, but I think to be in a position where I'm uncomfortable, to me, suggests that I'm definitely learning new things, and that's where the role's been a great one.
And obviously the other aspect with working at an AFL club is you get to see players who you've coached go on and get drafted to AFL clubs. That must be another great highlight as well.
Yeah, it is. And I think it goes back to my approach at Carlton. I think the thing is, for me in this role here at Oakleigh and also at Vic Metro, is to be a resource for these young athletes. And if they want to use myself and other resources to their advantage in order to improve as footballers, then I'm here for that. At no stage do I suggest that I'm responsible for their development or growth as a player, and or them getting drafted. I think they're responsible for that. I'm just I'm a very small part of a little bit of their journey and that development to where they've put their best foot forward to be deemed as AFL talent. And so I take pride in the work I do with them, but I definitely don't take pride in the fact that kids get drafted. I think the overall impact we have on all our athletes is a really important one, whether that be for community football, whether that be for, their transition from VC into the professional world, creating good habits, understanding communication is a really important part of stepping out in the workforce. All those sorts of things we take really seriously in our program. And percentages suggest a very small handful of our playing group will end up on AFL lists at some point in time, but we also, again, make sure we're ready to support those players as they pursue that career.
The Oakleigh Chargers in 2022 finished the season with 8 wins and 5 losses, finishing 5th on the ladder. How did you reflect on that season for the Oakleigh Chargers?
I think the season was a real success, Fletch. I think that's the first time I've heard how many wins and losses we had last year. I don't really care for wins and losses. My job is to make sure we're improving every single week. And I know that sounds probably a little bit harsh or cliche, but my job isn't to win premierships. My job is to support players with their development and hopefully their pursuit of potentially AFL, but also VFL football, community football, bettering them with regards to those day-to-day habits and how they apply themselves to something they're committed to is really important. So we put players in a position to hopefully allow them to succeed, but also if not, it's definitely not a failure. It's just learning how they can continue to improve and get better. And we feel that we create an environment where majority of players hopefully felt that was the case, and that to me is the most important thing.
And outside of your role at the Oakleigh Chargers, you're also the founder of Factory 41, which is designed to support elite junior talent as their ideal pathway into AFL footy. What was sort of the reasoning behind founding and creating Factory 41?
Yeah, it's a good question, Fletch. I guess I grew up in the Gippsland area and, regional, obviously Gippsland, and then and now reside down in Geelong and have spent time down the Surf Coast down there as well. And accepting a role in the Oakleigh region was really insightful for me to see how much accessibility these young athletes had through, whether that be through APS schools, school holiday programs, other things in metropolitan Melbourne, and probably felt that something was missing in those regional areas. So I felt with my, building essentially a skill set in player development, particularly with obviously football, that there was an opportunity, particularly post-COVID, where young athletes were really craving a chance to improve and get better, and or at the very least, just provide insight into what pathway programs could look like, or what, being in an AFL list could look like, so that those moments for them weren't overwhelming when they stepped hopefully one day into them. So it was about being a resource again for regional areas where I felt there was a lack of resources, and that's definitely not directed at anyone, just more so that there was a bit of a gap there where I felt someone of my skill set could really give back to the Geelong community initially, and looking to obviously broaden from there, but definitely give back to sort of younger athletes in that 10 to 14 range where they were really inquisitive about their football, and maybe introduce some things where they felt really confident on how, or the direction of how they could improve over the coming years before they stepped into those pathway programs like the Oakleigh Chargers.
If people want to get involved in the Factory 41 program in 2023, how can they sort of register and jump on board?
You're a good man, Fletch. Yeah, we'll obviously the website keeps us up to date. We're looking at some school holiday programs for the upcoming April holidays. We're just going to make sure, like everyone at the moment, ground availability amongst other things. So we'll lock in a few dates in the coming weeks, and hopefully get some stuff out for the April holidays. And again, we really target those 10 to 14-year-olds that are craving that opportunity to grow and develop, and be a resource for them to really be introduced to how they can improve their fundamentals, introduction to strength and conditioning. And by that, I mean not weights, I mean just some hand-eye coordination, some activation things where they can definitely find themselves in a position to perform. And we also start to introduce some concepts in and around decision-making that we feel is at a high level for that age group.
It sounds like it's a great program, and it's great that you've sort of founded it and created it. Is it ever difficult to maintain a work-life balance while being a head coach of the Oakleigh Chargers and also being involved with the Vic Metro Boys program?
Oh, it definitely is, and that's my priority. My priority is the Oakleigh Chargers and Vic Metro, and I think the curiosity for me to continue to improve. I'd never, up until recently, never had my own business, so even for me to learn professionally in my own time, it was important that if I was going to start my own business, it was directly correlated to where my skill set lies. So that sense where that model came from. But the reality is my priority is no doubt Oakleigh and Vic Metro, and juggling things in and around that, being a dad, being a husband, and also having the small business. It is challenging at different stages, but I think that's also deliberate to make sure that I'm always looking to improve and be challenged and find ways to make it work, but also learn ways that it doesn't work, and try something different.
Thank you very much for joining me today, Jason, on the Footy with Fletch podcast. It was lovely to talk to you.
Thanks, Fletch. Appreciate your time.